Today's conversation marks the first in a series of public programs in conjunction with the exhibition Gail Rebhan About Time, currently on view at the California Museum of Photography through August 17th. Before we begin and introduce today's guests, we at UCR Arts would first like to recognize and acknowledge our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Gabrielingo, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. So this series of programs explores the themes present in Gail Rebhan's work, from labor and family life to aging, time, and political activism. Today's discussion focuses on immigration, assimilation, and activism in her photographic process. The exhibition was originally organized by the American University Museum in Washington, D.C., where it was on view in 2023. It was curated by Sally Stein, Professor Emerita in the Department of Art History at UC Irvine. Dr. Stein continues to research and write about modern and contemporary photography in relation to broader questions of culture and society. So in addition to Gail Rebhan About Time, she's curated or co-curated exhibitions on Ken O'Hara, John Gutman, Rondell Partridge, and her late husband, Alan Sekula. Mac Publishing, which also published Gail Rebhan About Time catalog and Stein's monograph on Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother, will shortly bring out a selection of her essays titled Close-Ups from Afar. So with that, I'd like to now invite Dr. Stein to introduce our guests.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to start by introducing Michael Scott Alexander, who's the Maimonides Chair of Jewish Studies and Professor of Religious Studies at UC Riverside. Most recently, he's the author of Making Peace with the Universe, Personal Crisis and Spiritual Healing. His book, Jazz Age Jews, won the National Jewish Book Award. Alexander earned a PhD in Religious Studies from Yale University and a BA in Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations from the University of Pennsylvania. He writes about Jewish history, psychology of religion, and medical humanities. Christina Fernandez is a Los Angeles-based photographer whose practice explores issues related to migration, labor, gender, Mexican-American identity, and the unique capacities of the photographic medium. She earned her BA at UCLA in 1989, her MFA at CalArts in 1996. She's associate professor at Cerritos College, Norwalk, where she's been on faculty since 2001. Her retrospective exhibition, Christina Fernandez, Multiple Exposures, which originated at UCR Arts California Museum of Photography and curated by Joanna Zupinska in 2002, has now traveled phenomenally to 5 additional museums throughout the US and is currently on view at DePaul Art Museum in Chicago through August 3. Congratulations, Christina. Last but hardly least, and next tile, please. Here, I'm going to give a few views of the Rebhan exhibition at the CMP Arts Center that moves from micro-family dynamics to here, macro dynamics, along with thanks for a superb installation by in-house folks like Joanna Zupinska and also Grace Saunders. Gail Rebhan is a Washington, D.C. based photographer and professor emerita of photography at Northern Virginia Community College. She has an MFA from California Institute of the Arts, and which is also where Christina got her MFA and an undergraduate degree from Antioch College. Next, please. And here I'm really trying to give you a sense of the exhibition, which looks fabulous, in my opinion. Integral to Rebhan's work are various bodies of work and is an interest in time and change. Her works, which often configure photographs and text in series, examines gender, aging, race, ethnicity, and the built environment, which itself is never fixed but ever changing. The child of immigrants, Rebhan documents the experience of several Jewish relatives who faced rising anti-Semitism in Central Europe during the Nazi era, and then their immigration stories. Her art on the art bus commissioned by the Arlington County, Virginia, tells immigration assimilation stories crossing generations in a wide variety of ethnic groups. Next, please. She also creates photo collages examining the cultural history of specific sites in Washington, D.C. and surrounding communities where she lives. Her recent self-portraits, next, please, of which you get a glimpse here, examine the taboo subject of female aging, again combining images with, if you'll see below, text. Her most recent body of work, next, please, included for the first time in this Riverside exhibition, explores the archive of federal census documents that began in 1790 and continues every 10 years to ask us to consider, as her title has it, what questions do we ask of ourselves and others? Rebhan has had works in hundreds of exhibitions, including at the Lentos Kunstmuseum in Linz, Austria, Museum Folkwang Essen, Germany, and Blue Sky Gallery, Portland, Oregon, and many DC galleries. In conjunction with her first museum retrospective, Gail Rebhan, About Time, at the AU Museum, Katzen Art Center in Washington, DC, Mac Books published Gail Rebhan, About Time, with running commentaries by myself. In 2025, the retrospective traveled and expanded with a new work that you'll see in the flag set, of which you'll see only half here, at UCR Arts Center. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start next with simply an establishing view of a wall titled Immigration, Assimilation, Activism, one of Rebhan's titles. And we're going to move quickly to maybe the oddest situated work in the entire exhibition and in almost any exhibition on the floor. Next, please. And I'm going to ask Gail to read the text here for Welcome Until We're Not 2022, playing obviously on the standard universally available welcome mat.
So this lists some of the Jewish expulsions throughout history, starting in 733 BCE, Samaria, Israel, Judea. I'm not going to pronounce the king's name correctly. Deports Jews. 1492, the Spanish Inquisition. Al-Haram decree expels Jews. Then this one is less well known. 1862, General Grant's Order Number 11 expels Jews from Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky. 1940s Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered. 1956 to 1958, 23,000 to 25,000 Jews flee Egypt. 1985, 10,000 Jews flee Ethiopia. And in 1991, 14,000 more flee. The 1970s to 1990s, hundreds of thousands of Jews leave the Soviet Union. And then 2021 New York State Police report anti-Semitic incidents increase almost 50% in 1 year, which was the most recent statistic when I did this in 2022.
Thank you. We're going to go on, though I think actually Michael wanted to add something here. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. I mean, insofar as I can add anything to it, I mean, it's a very direct image, or not just image, but image and words. But I just wanted to give a little historical background to this. That so I'm in Jewish history, of course. Since the fall of the ancient state of Judea, Jews in their diaspora have only been welcomed by official contract, or what was called a charter, with the kings or the aristocracy of the different regions to which they migrated. And that charter, typically those kings or aristocracy would allow Jewish presence and settlement insofar as Jews might have brought some kind of economic boon to the area because of distribution networks. In other words, Jews in their diaspora were able to move things around, and that had an economic benefit to the aristocracy. But as soon as the economies faltered, it was often the case, as this image points out, that the charters were revoked, the contracts were revoked, and the Jews had no legal right to stay there. So this welcome mat really does pretty summarily show the history of the Jewish relationship to different states and to different locations over the entire history, really until the American experiment, in which Jews were granted citizenship directly and there was no charter. There was nothing that could be revoked. So I found this to be perhaps the most, well, it's certain, it might be the most powerful image in the exhibit for me.
I did forget to say welcome until we're not, which is
typical of, Gail, your work in terms of having often a kind of little twist at the end. That's true in some of the self-portraits also, like gray hair, but we'll leave that for another time. But you think, oh, welcome, okay, and then you start to read these texts and then welcome until we're not. Suddenly puts a condition on it, a major caveat, as it were. Okay, next, please, because we are going to move fast through this. Dishman, I had to ask Gail, how do you pronounce his first name? Dishman, 2017. Gail, do you want to read bits of this text here?
So what this is about is there's photographs from my family when they were in Europe and then in the United States. And the Dishman is that the last name was changed and everybody's first name, they decide to change their first name as well. So from Devora to Dorothy. And the little text tells some of the history of how they immigrated. So an older brother, Ijaic, was not allowed to immigrate yet because of because he was of military age. 3 years later, he arrived in Cleveland, and you see his name changes to Arthur. And so it tells the story and the different kinds of passports. So it does talk about assimilation, that everybody changes their name and the difference in the style of dress from in Europe to the United States and the color in black and white.
Making everything supposedly easier, but also more, in some ways, divorced and alienating from earlier roots. Christina, I think you saw a connection between this work and Bend from 1999-2000, and then
2020 was the last, was the final, I think, iteration of this piece. But I really responded to the Dishman work because I feel like Gail and I talk about similar things, but the result is very different. It's still photography, and in this case in particular, I feel like I very much related to the composite aspect of the work, of the previous work, of the Dishman work, and also the notion of using text to describe a family immigration story. In this piece, this is really, the text here is really about a return to Mexico. I'm fourth generation Mexican American, and going to Mexico, one of the first times that I went to Oaxaca, and there was, this disconnect between what I expected to find and feel and what I actually found and ended up feeling, right? So a lot of disillusionment, a lot of separation, a lot of feeling connected, but being very disparate in culture and language. So the passports in the Dishman piece also very much, describes this idea of like going back and forth to homeland and immigrating from homeland. And so this piece is actually a travel narrative about going back to Oaxaca, going back to Mexico, and about my grandmother who was dying when I left for the trip to Oaxaca and died when I was there. And this idea, or this problematic notion of going back to a homeland, but then your family is somewhere else, and the most significant member of my family was dying somewhere else in the US. And this kind of fallout from this sort of romanticized idea of homeland. So anyways, I
Maybe
just,
you'll say something about the detail. Can we have the next one, please?
so another reason why I was very interested in Gail's work was her use of her body in the most recent work that we're talking about. And I'm actually returning to a performance for camera practice as well, and talking about my postmenopausal body. So we're on the same page there. So this is an image of my back with a rudimentary sort of skeleton placed on it. The text in Bend has a lot about carrying a burden, the burden of motherhood in particular, and the burden of a kind of racism in a way. So here is a performance for camera piece where I'm sort of grasping at this skeleton and grasping at my back, and it's becoming very messy, right? So it's sort of a symbolic of the process of, you know, the process that I talked about before, which is, this notion of going back home when it's not really your home, right? Because I'm fourth generation. So I think this is a common issue with immigrants and the, descendants of immigrants.
Being pressed between different legacies
Absolutely.
and world.
And cultural practices and just identification,
Yes. Next. Banned Books 2018. I wondered, Gail, if you would read for those people who may have trouble reading the text here.
The 1935 Nuremberg laws prohibited Jews from marrying or having sexual relations with Germans. My teenage father dated non-Jews. Consequently, he had to temporarily leave Germany and stay with relatives in Belgium. There he read books banned in Germany. On his bike ride back, he brought with him anti-Nazi pamphlets. I don't know if, at the time, he understood the danger of this activity. And so it includes the covers of these banned books, many which people find really surprising, like Helen Keller was banned. And also, this speaks to my father always being rebellious. The background is a map of Europe from that time period, along with a photograph of him and a bicycle of that era, along with a lot of newspaper articles that talk about the Nuremberg laws that are being adopted.
You really pile it on, but it remains readable if one moves in and looks closely. Next, It Can't Get Any Worse, 2021.
It can't get any worse. My grandmother disagreed. The family must leave Germany. Bubby remained a worrier. When we visited, she would look out the window with an anxious expression on her face. I think she was afraid that we would get into a car crash. A part of this is, I guess, about the trauma of leaving, and but it's also the characteristic that the reason I'm here is because she was a worrier, and that was a positive quality for us to leave. But in American society, that's not so great to have that quality. So I think it's interesting how certain personality traits are advantageous in one society and not in another society.
Or political era.
Right.
Michael, I think you wanted to say something about this.
Yep, very briefly. Well, actually about the, regarding the last slide, so the Nuremberg laws were literally the revoking of the charter or the citizenship of Jews. So that's an example of the welcome mat, welcome until we're not. So that's what the Nuremberg laws were. And then for the next slide, the only thing I wanted to comment about, because I'm not an artist or even trained in images, but I was trained when studying Jewish history and immigrant history. My own teacher, Paula Hyman, used to say that you could tell the immigrants in the photographs because they didn't know to smile for the camera. And the Americans knew that you're supposed to smile for the camera. And so when I saw this image, it's clear to me, like this is somebody that you're not trained to how to behave in front of a camera. So whether that has something to do with worrying or not, I'm not sure, but it does, I guess it does indicate a certain attitude toward the capturing of one's image.
Yes, how to behave happily or seriously in this case. Next, please. Thank you. Home Alone, 2021.
So this one is, when I was old enough to be home alone, my bubby called and asked to speak to my mother. I told her that Mom was not home and would be back soon. I heard my Yiddish-speaking grandmother growing more and more hysterical. She thought something was wrong. And what you see in blue is the Yiddish alphabet and the word bubby in Yiddish. And this is all about miscommunication and not communication. I cannot read the Hebrew alphabet. I cannot read Yiddish, so I don't understand those letters myself. And I've shown this to, I was really brought up to assimilate and not to learn Yiddish, not to learn German. And so consequently, I couldn't have a very close relationship with my grandparents because I couldn't communicate with them, which I think is typical in many immigrant groups.
Yes. Thanks. I also, when I first saw this working with Gail, I went, but why are these, is there a Hebrew alphabet for this? And it was Gail who said, that's not for Hebrew alphabet, that's for Yiddish. And I went, oops. So this was really a learning process for me as well, even though I am Jewish, but my, it's seventh generation. They came after 1848, so it's a long time ago and assimilated much more. Next, political act.
Quickly.
Sorry.
So in my household, Spanish was used as a language to talk about adult things in front of children because the children didn't learn Spanish. It's very different now, obviously, but that's the reason I don't know Spanish. And my parents grew up speaking Spanish, but were punished for it in school. So their idea of teaching their children Spanish was like kind of a traumatizing thing. They didn't want us to not be able to fit in. So there's all kinds of weird things about language where we're pressured to assimilate, and yet as adults we realize that we've lost something significant.
Yeah.
Much.
Mine is the same situation. My parents would speak in Yiddish to each other when they didn't want me and my brother to understand.
Okay, next. Yes, Political Act 2021. You can see it on the wall, and here you see it in detail. Gail, would you read?
When I was about 10, my father asked me to take a friend's daughter to our community swimming pool. She was shy. I wanted to ask if her skin tanned. I thought this was an inappropriate question and didn't ask. I never saw her again. I don't remember her name. No one bothered us. There was no trouble. I didn't realize it was a political act until about 55 years later. And there's an image of a swimming pool, of a swimsuit, and then me at a swimming pool in a bathing suit, and then a lot of newspaper articles, because this was at the time, was very controversial to allow Blacks into using swimming pools, integrate swimming pools.
Not only Blacks, but also Mexican children. Yeah.
But I, as a kid, you're totally unaware, or I was totally unaware of all this controversy, and I just knew it was my dad's, daughter's friend, daughter, and my dad's friend's daughter, and somehow I knew it was inappropriate to ask her if she tanned, which is interesting. And I don't know if she went integrating a lot of different swimming pools, if this was something that her family did all the time, but I think it's interesting how you just take things for granted as a kid. And it wasn't really until many years later when I asked my brother and I was thinking about this, and he said, of course it was a political act.
And as the exhibition details, though Gail likes to think of herself as a pretty typical first-generation American, Her father, though he never graduated from high school in this process of immigration, rose in the ranks of the UAW as a labor organizer after first working in a factory, and became a major international labor leader, as was eulogized at the time of his death in the Washington Post, even as an international labor leader. So, and we'll see this, his work as a progressive in the unions in the next piece, Soldiers Field.
That's beautiful, beautiful. I love that.
This is, I was 10 when my family went to hear Dr. Martin Luther King. Before the event, my father described the importance of Dr. King. During his speech, I asked my mother why people were interrupting and being rude. She explained call and response. And so, again, this is about this cultural disconnect. I grew up in a white, at that time, a completely white suburb. And I was totally misinterpreting the situation because I thought it's impolite to interrupt people, whereas it was really this call and response was an affirmative activity, but I just totally didn't understand.
I love the way you sort of enlarge your picture or insert your picture there, even though you're really just a tiny dot in the crowd. But in terms of this memory of being there, of this being in some ways a first rally that your father took, a major rally that your father took you to. Michael, I think you wanted to say something.
Well, the only thing I wanted to say about this image and this period of history of kind of Jewish interest in African American civil rights is that something that brings the groups together is we're in the middle of the Passover holiday as we are having this event. Something that brings the groups together is a shared identification with the plight of the ancient Israelites who, according to the story, were in a condition of slavery and were brought to a condition of freedom. And that an interesting aspect of that ancient story from the book of Exodus of the Hebrew Bible is that unlike other myths of the ancient world in which it's an aristocracy that has a relationship with God, it's the kings that have a kind of relationship with God. The Hebrew story, the Hebrew myth, it's an enslaved people. It's a marginalized people that actually have the closest relationship to God, who are the chosen people. And so that was that idea was grasped onto by the African American church as much as it was grasped onto or it was continued to have resonance for Jewish people. And so it is a kind of a storytelling aspect of both cultures that they share together and may have some of the power of bringing the communities together, especially in the civil rights period.
Also, how important it was for major labor organizations to support this, as Gail's father was already a major figure in the UAW, and how the UAW really supported the civil rights struggle, both Jews and not Jews, in labor activities. We're going to turn past the cultural history that Gail did in her neighborhood to move to the BACC, the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. Gail, can you actually talk a little bit about this map? Just why you chose to use the map here? The maps recur in your work.
So I was commissioned to do this piece by American University for a show they were having about 3 historically Black communities in Montgomery County, Maryland. And it's about Moses Cemetery, and it was completely desecrated in the 1960s. So it's a parking lot. There's nothing visible that makes it seem like a cemetery. So it was because most of my cultural history pieces incorporate a historic photograph and then a new photograph that I've taken that I incorporate together. But there was I couldn't find any photographs of the cemetery, any historical photographs of when it was a cemetery. So it was very difficult to figure out how to do this visually. So a lot of it is this parking lot, this cracked parking lot. But then I had to have maps, and I found a map that from 1917 that clearly shows that there was a cemetery here because it was very much disputed. This area is, people want to redevelop it now and cause further desecration. The bodies were never, they were just paved over. They were never moved or anything. So that's what I'm trying to show in here. And I have obituaries from the newspaper that say people were buried in Moses Cemetery, and also talk about the redevelopment of that area.
All of which really attests also to your deep work in archives to extract all this information, which is often buried or hidden, as the cemetery itself also was. Next, please, to give it a better sense of some of the exhibition pictures here. We see the church now overshadowed by the high rise, and two demonstration pictures, but I thought one would give a sense of where they're still like bulldozing, but now the BACC, the coalition, is trying to really impose some rules about slowing down the bulldozing process to try to find what remains, as well as protesting, as you can see here. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Gail?
Well, I just want to say that I feel very close to this issue because the desecration of cemeteries in Europe, the Jewish cemeteries were desecrated. And my mother's hometown in Suwałk, Poland, the tombstones were used to line Nazi swimming pools. And to me, this is the same thing. This happens all over the country for African American burial grounds, indigenous peoples' burial grounds. And it just feels like it's the same thing, this desecration of people that you view not as people.
Next, moving right along. This is an establishing shot of the aging wall from this aging series about her father already when he's in decline, except bookended on the left by one picture we're going to turn to next. Yeah. Can you read the text here?
Do you want me to read all of it? My father grew up in Germany and spoke Yiddish at home. His family fled Nazism in 1938 and moved to Cleveland. At 18, he learned to speak English fluently. I grew up speaking English at home. As my father's dementia grew worse, he started to speak German or perhaps Yiddish to me. I would say, "Dad, speak English. I don't understand German." He would continue the conversation in English. Gradually, he lost the ability to switch back to English. When I visited him, I never knew if he would speak English or German or Yiddish. One time my dad said to me in German, "Why don't you understand German? You grew up speaking German." And this is very common, that when people get dementia, they revert back to their first language. And it's very sad. It's a picture of him as a boy, and then the kind of children's books he would have read.
And then we're going to move to the right-hand side of this long wall, which has many really interesting, also poignant and frustrating images of decline and facing decline and wanting to stop it. But of course, it's often unstoppable. At the time of his death, you took out your large format camera to make this picture, which includes other pictures in it. It's a kind of natural collage in some ways, on the top with Golda Meir, and also with Pope John Paul, which really attests to how important your father was as an international labor leader, that he was both speaking to the Prime Minister of Israel and then also called to the Pope in Rome, etc., in the Vatican. And a family picture almost hidden behind all these medical things, along with a dead plant. I don't know if you want to say anything more about this.
I wanted to include this picture because I didn't want it just to be about dementia, but for people to realize that, he was a vibrant person, an intelligent person, and the end of life is just so sad for so many people. I mean, dementia affects all kinds of people. So I wanted to show what his life was like before dementia.
He was also an influential person. And yet, I guess I'm struck by this in terms of starting in the COVID era, I started thinking maybe the only democracy really is death. That brings all of us low, even the most important and influential people, both Nepo people and self-made people in the case of Herman Rebhan. But death occurs to everyone, and it's something we try to avoid facing most of the time. And as Gail has herself said, she really wants to speak about that which is avoided or considered unspeakable, as she has done here. Next. This is the new piece that actually was made after the 2023 retrospective we together organized in Washington. And Gail said, what do you think about adding this? And at first I thought, are you kidding? We're adding something else. Then I thought, I looked at it and went, and this was even before the new administration, I went, yes, we really need, these are the questions we need to consider. Why are we asking these questions? And hopefully, because typical of Gail, she doesn't say this is the question that you need to ask, but she hopes it will provoke us to think about what other questions we might ask as a nation of all of our residents. So this is English, and I wondered if you would read these 3 lines.
So in 1890 census, the question was, can the person speak English? If not, what language does he speak? In 1970 census said, what language other than English was spoken in the person's home as a child? Spanish, French, German, other, none, only English. And in the 2020 census, does this person speak a language other than English at home? What is this language? For example, Korean, Italian, Spanish, Vietnamese. How well does the person speak English? Very well, not at all. And I just think it's fascinating how the questions change, even though the topic is the same, which is English. And then, of course, in 1890, it's what language does he speak? And then it becomes the person speaks, so it becomes not as sexist. And then in 1970, all the examples are European languages, whereas it's more global in 2020. And also in 2020, it's functional. In the 1890, it's just binary. Can the person speak English? Yes or no. And so it's interesting to me how the questions change. And to me, all of this work is a synopsis of American history, of our values, our changing values, the way the questions change, the emphasis changes. And the background is census forms from different eras where the typography changes.
Can we go next? Because it also depends upon the questioner's subjective interpretation of this information.
Right, there's assumptions in the questions.
I was going to ask you to speak about the other categories and how you develop them, but now I actually think we're running out of time, so I'm going to move on. Back to caregiving, but earlier work about parenting with works on wall from this book that you see on the pedestal, Mother-Son Talk. Can we go to the next, please? The things we don't do. And would you read this, Gail?
When my older son was about 3 or 4, I realized that everything he was learning about Judaism was negative. The things we don't do, we don't celebrate Christmas, we don't celebrate Easter. My husband and I decided we needed to start observing the Jewish holidays and rituals more frequently. After the silent prayer on our first Friday night Shabbat service, my son told me he prayed he could celebrate Christmas. And the picture shows a Santa Claus and a Torah, and of course Santa Claus is a much more desirable toy.
This always cracks me up in the book, which is still available at CMP. I know that Christina wanted to suggest a link or a connection to one of her recent pieces, Suburban Nightscape #1, Max San Diego, 2023.
My son is 5th generation on my side, but his father is Mexican. He's like in this very weird in between space. And I love the work about your son and all this, you know, the one that talks about him wanting a blonde girlfriend, you know, this this move towards like being an American, right? And what that entails and what that means. I mean, I think for my son, this process has been going on for a long time because it was, you know, 4 generations ago that Maria came over from Mexico. So um, we sort of revel in this assimilation. He's got an American muscle car. He looks like a regular kid. He is a regular kid. All his friends, though, happen to be of Mexican American descent and white. And he's got some other, you know, like Asian friends. We live in a very diverse community here. But in terms of his cohorts, who are more recent immigrants from Guatemala, from Salvador, from Mexico, he's to them a white boy.
Hmm.
Even though his father's Mexican. So this really interesting thing that happens with identity and this, this sort of range of what it's like to be Jewish or what it's like to be Mexican or what it's like to be, well, Asians and Blacks, they have other kinds of signifiers, right? So anyways, I just wanted to insert this because I just love the work that Gail did about her son. It really resonated with me. All his like wanting to celebrate Christmas and be like a regular person.
Yes. We're going to go to one more piece from the mother-son talk. Gail Rebhan, Jewish, 1997. Would you read this?
When my son was younger, he did not like being Jewish. We don't celebrate Christmas, in parentheses, get presents. We are not like everybody else. In second grade, he became interested in drama. Now at age 12, he wants to be a comedian. He feels validated because so many comedians are Jewish. Um, I think it's really interesting how that is so important of how you are portrayed in the media, how that influences you.
Indeed, the media as the other parent in some ways. And here's a great example of the way kids contend with diversity, and especially as minoritarians seek positive role models to fuel their own ambitions. More in a month on feminism and women artists making art about caregiving in the next Zoom. Next, we're going to I urge everyone to come see the exhibition because it's much better in the real than on your monitor, especially if it's on a small monitor. And next, the second to last title is simply, if you're interested, here's the catalog to the exhibition before what questions do we ask, that you can order from MAC. And then I already mentioned the next Zoom, caregiving in the work of Gail Rebhan, but also about the role of being a woman, having often typed into being the main caregiver, both for children and for elders, as well as what are the stereotypes of being a woman artist, and what are in some ways, the don't go there as an artist who is also a woman. So on May 8th, there's a Zoom with Gail, Kimberly Hiroto, Jenny Sorkin, Rachel Wu, and myself again as moderator. Thank you.